and Islam, which cover many areas of the world, we find that God birthed them through this one man, Abraham. God would make his name great. God would bring forth nations from him. God is committed to fulfilling what he says. But there is an important step. And that is the step of obedience. And friends, to your life and mine, as God calls us into things, as God shows us, as God impresses on us, God puts before us always a step of obedience. In the first journey that our relationship we have with God, it starts with the step of obedience. A willingness to identify our need of God. But as we progress in that journey, God will confront you with situations and places where He say, I demand. I'm not asking, I am demanding obedience. Because obedience is the place of the release into God's blessing. And friends, to some of us it can be a very insignificant little thing. That God may be speaking and saying, I want your obedience in this. To some of us it may be something bigger, right? And I don't know how it is. Each one will be different. But what God is looking for is the willingness to obey. And you know, I love the story of Abraham because sometimes people make it a little more glorified than it is. They try to portray a picture of Abraham as, this absolutely flawless being who took these absolutely flawless steps of obedience and God honored him. Not so. What I see in Abraham is a faith that is a growing faith. Can you say with this name? Growing faith. Growing faith. Because sometimes we think we're going to arrive. That faith is, okay, bam, that's it. Right? So when we fall, we feel everything's shattered, everything's gone. God has cast us out. No more relationship is written us off. The purpose He had is out the window. Ever felt like that? Ever felt like that? Where you've taken a step and then suddenly you've fallen flat on your face and you felt, oh God, it's all finished. Now I have nowhere to go. I have nothing ahead of me. You're going to abandon me. But we see that Abraham, sometimes, we start with chapter 12. And chapter 12 talks of Abraham being called. But the reality is that according to Acts chapter 7 and verse 4, where Stephen is talking of the journey of Abraham, he starts it before chapter 12. He starts in chapter 11 and verse 31. And chapter 11 and verse 31 talks of Abraham's father taking Abraham and his nephew Lot and heading out from Ur of the Chaldees. And we find here that the step of faith, God called Abraham, but somebody else had to virtually catch him by the scruff of the neck and say, we're going. We're going. Because maybe Abraham wanted to obey, but he had the struggle to obey. You with me? He had the desire to obey, but he had a struggle to obey. And I just love this because I believe that for many of us, we can be in that position today. We can have the desire to obey. And we're like, God, I'm struggling though. I want to do what your word says, but I'm struggling with this. And friends, the first step, I believe, in the journey of obedience is to have the desire for obedience. Is to have the desire. Because sometimes we don't have the power but we have the desire. And God is not going to reject you for the fact that you don't have the power, but you have the desire. Instead, God comes alongside you and God gives you the motivation and the power. The first step in the act of obedience is to have the desire for obedience. And friends, in our lives this morning, as God speaks to us, do we have a yearning to obey? Do we have a struggle saying, God, I know, but I'm really struggling. Would you help me, God? God, I know that this is what you want to do, but I don't have the strength within me. I need your strength. God is not going to look at you and say, oh, get over it. Get on with the job. God will come alongside you and He will give you the strength. So God causes a man who had no connection with God, because it says that Terah was, in fact, a worshipper of other gods. But God uses him to be an instrument of blessing to Abraham. And God uses this man to cause Abraham to get up and move out. But they start the journey, and we see that it continues. This unfolding of growing faith. They start the journey and they end up in a place called Haran, which is between Ur of the Chaldeans and the place that God desired Abraham to go. And they settle down. Instead of keeping moving, they settle down in Haran. And they become comfortable there. And sometimes, as we start the journey, we can get to that place too, where we get comfortable with a middle ground. Comfortable saying, God, I took a step of faith, but now it seems good. Let's just stay here. Let's be comfortable where we are. But God's desire is to take you to the place of His purpose. Friends, there is more for your life. There is more for your life. There is more that God wants for you. Do not settle in the place of middle ground, because when we settle in the middle ground, God does something different to grow our faith. You know what He does? He makes the comfortable become uncomfortable. He makes the comfortable become uncomfortable. And we find that in Haran, Abraham is living life, all's good, and then his father dies. And something that was all going good, you must understand that it says that his father died at 205 years. Now to us that might seem like, whoa, 205 years, right? You'd have got 2 cards from the Queen. Okay? But 205 years didn't mean very much at that time. People were living for 600, 400, 500 years. The lifespan was long in the time. And we find that in a sense, his father's lifespan got cut short as it were. And something started to change, started to make Abraham have to start to think again and start to connect with God again. Because chapter 12, verse 1 has an important verse there, a word there. It says, God had spoken to Abraham. And friends, I believe that God is bringing Abraham back to the call of God. And sometimes in our life, in the journey of growing faith, first of all, God might bring situations around us where God will help us to step out. And friends, if you're in that place, reach out to God. Don't beat yourself down and say, God, oh, I just don't have the power to do this. I want to do it, I so desire, so I'm giving up. No. Have the desire in your heart and say, God, my desire is to do this. I need your strength. I need your enabling. What is God speaking to you this morning? That you are saying, God, I'm struggling with it. What is God speaking to your life this morning that you say, God, I'm really struggling with this one. It's a big step. Friends, seek God. He will give you the enabling. He brought into his life from a very unusual source, through his father, the ability to move. But then the growing step of faith had to mature, because Abraham now ends up in Haran and is satisfied. And God stirs him and says, don't be satisfied, there is more. And friends, in your life and mine, God is speaking this morning. If you are in a place where you have got comfortable, where everything is working for you, life is now predictable, everything's happening as you desire, you know that the mortgage is going to be paid, that these things have fallen into place, right? And God might be just telling you there is more. There is more for your life. There is more that I have for you. So friends, be willing to position yourself to walk into all that God purposes. The second thought I want to leave with you this morning, to walk in the favor of God, in the blessing of God, it requires faith. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 8 says, by faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed God and went, even though he did not know where he was going. You see, he trusted that God who made the promise was faithful to fulfill it. And friends, in our lives, that can be a very challenging area, because we've got to trust who God is. We've got to trust that God is trustworthy. You with me? You've got to trust that God is trustworthy. You don't trust somebody, right, until you have taken something of them and seen that they are faithful. Right? You don't just walk out on a limb and trust someone. You don't walk out to somebody and say, you know what, would you take my ATM card, here's the PIN number, right? Just go across to the ATM somewhere and draw me $1,000 and come back. What's the possibility that the card and the money will never reach you again? Yeah? Right? What's the possibility? If I ask you this morning, right? How many would just turn around to somebody and say, hi, here's my phone, and here's the PIN number for opening my phone. Open my phone and have a browse. Right? You wouldn't do it. Because your phone is personal. Your emails are there. Your photographs are there. Your Instagram is there. Whatever's there, right? And you're not going to let anybody. You know it in the world today of social media. How many of you accept everybody who wants to be a friend? Right? How many of you have to hit a trust button to trust the website? God is trustworthy. And Abraham had to come to that understanding in his life. To move from trusting the purpose to trusting the person who was giving the purpose. It goes on in Hebrews 11, further down, I think it's verse 11. It says, by faith Abraham, even though he was past age and Sarah herself was barren, was enabled to become a father because he considered him faithful who had made the promise. So you see, when we choose to trust God, Abraham was not pursuing just the promise. he was trusting that God was faithful to the promise. And we find that this is significant because Abraham had to go past or jump some hurdles to do this. Yeah? For instance, Sarah was past the age of childbearing. Yet, God gives him a promise that out of him, he would bring a great nation. That his descendants would be more numerous than the stars in the sky or the sand on the seashore. And God is giving this to a man whose wife is barren. Do you think Abraham had reason to doubt that God maybe got it a little wrong? That maybe God got the wrong Abraham? That maybe he should look around again? Do you think he had reason to think, is this really going to happen? Is it possible? Then God calls him to a place called Canaan. You know, the Bible talks of Canaan being the land flowing with milk and honey. But Canaan is a land that did not have a proper irrigation system. In fact, they say that, if you read the Bible, you find that when the patriarchs went into Canaan, they kept digging wells. Because wells was the source of water in the land. They didn't have an irrigation system. And you're saying, God, you're taking me to this place? Are you serious? Ur the Chaldeans was a well-reputed area. It was prosperous. In fact, it's one of the few archaeological sites that have been excavated. And they said it had a thriving economy. And God was removing him from this place. He was sending him to a land that was so often ravaged by, famine. And he was saying, I'm going to bless you in this place. And I'm going to prosper you more than you can understand and more than you will ever be able to see in your lifetime. It will not just be for you, it will be for the generations after you. Friends, it's good to have a promise like that. But to have a promise like that and take it seriously, you have to know who's made the promise. You have to know that the check that is written actually has the funds in the bank to honor the check. You have to know that when you go to encash it, you don't get handed back that check and so, I'm sorry, your check is bounced. You see, God is faithful, and what he has promised, he will accomplish. And that is why the Word of God is so valuable to us today, because the Word of God is establishing in our hearts and in our lives that God was faithful to Abraham can be faithful to you. That God who was faithful to Abraham and brought to pass every promise that he made is a God who can be faithful in your situation this morning. That when you cry unto God, when you act according to the promise of God in faith, saying, God, I don't understand it, I don't see it. My eye can't even visualize what you have purposed. But I will trust you because your word shows me that you are trustworthy. And I want to encourage you, church, this morning. Step out in faith. There is more that God has for you. There is more that God desires for your life and mine. Put your ladder against the wall of God's purpose and start to say, God, I will act in obedience. I will act in faith. I will do what you are impressing on me through the Word of God. I will be obedient. Friends, that's all God is looking for. He's looking for the heart that is saying, I will be obedient. And God has now brought Abraham through a journey of faith. He's brought him through growing faith. But you see, things that are growing must mature, isn't it? Right? As things, a sign of growth is maturity. And before God can release him into the fullness of his purpose, he decides to test the faith of the man. So I'm talking this morning of this growing faith. The faith where God permits us to be, God, I want to do it, but I don't have the strength. And then God will bring in people, He'll bring in circumstances, He'll give you the resource within you to step up in faith. We talk of the growing faith where sometimes we get comfortable and plateau. And God will start to rearrange the furniture and start to change things so that we feel, okay, God, I'm stepping up. There is more. This is not where you want me to settle. And finally, God brings Abraham to a place where He says, and now I want to check whether your faith has matured. And we find that God brings Abraham into a place of testing. In an exam, the only way we know whether what we've studied, or understand the depth of our study is when we test ourselves, right? So to pass from one grade to another, you do a test, right? And the test will show you whether you're adequately learned in a certain area to move on to the next. And we find that God tests Abraham, and He tells him to take his son. It says, take your son, your one and only son, right? Genesis chapter 22, verses 1 to 3. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering to the one on one of the mountains I will tell you about. Early the next morning, Abraham got up, saddled his donkey, took his two of his servants and his son Isaac. Then he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering. He set out for the place that God told him about. And, this might raise a sort of a gory thing in our minds. What is God really saying? But read through the story. Right? But we see that God was really challenging the man, because God's purpose was going to come to pass through Isaac. He was the son, the one and only son of Abraham. And God was testing Abraham as to whether he trusted God, that God could fulfill the purpose without having to do it the logical way that he wanted. And sometimes, God blesses us and God gives us things in life, and God does amazing things in life. And we feel that, okay, God, this is set in concrete, that this is how you must work. That this is how the purpose must be fulfilled. And sometimes with that, we change our focus from God to our focus to the purpose. And God starts to stir Abraham. And He says, well, I'm going to now challenge where your priority lies. So Abraham, take up your son and go and do what I tell you. And I think this was very challenging, because I don't know if I would have struggled when God takes the very purpose He's given, or the very plan that it seems, and God says, okay, ditch that one. Let's go for something else. And you're like, God, I've invested my life into this. I've done it. And God is saying, ditch that one. Let's go with something else. And Abraham had to take a step of faith. The willingness to take the very purpose, the plan that God had revealed, and say, God, I'm not getting stuck on this. I'm stuck on you. I'm trusting you to come through. And we see that God lets Abraham go to the extent where he puts his son on the altar. He raises the knife. And in the moment when the knife was raised, God calls out. And he says, don't do it. Don't do it. But God had such a plan for this man that he had to be willing to obey to the very detail in God. How awesome is that? But you see that there had been a progression in faith. So like I said, don't beat yourself up if you're at the beginning of the journey. Maybe to some of us, we're at that place where we're starting. To some of us, we are on a middle ground. And to some of us, we may be at the place where God is saying, you've reached a place of maturity. I need to know it. Because I'm about to release you into the purpose of God. But I need to check that you are trusting me and not the purpose. Friends, is God checking us in some way this morning? And finally, I want to just bring this last thought to you. So after Abraham has proved himself in the purpose, we see that, or in faith in God rather than the purpose, we see that God starts to work in him. And I want to bring this last thought to you. And that is the thought of God's presence above his purpose or above his blessings. And that is God's ultimate desire for your life. As I was sharing, I think the previous week, prayer time, we were starting to pray for revival in the last 2 weeks, 2 months in church, starting to pray that God will do something. And I started to read up on the revivals that started to take place across the world. Not that you can replicate them, there are some in the move of God. But I wanted to see, God, what is the thing that stands out in this? Because the first week we started to pray, I remember in the back room, as we were praying, God really impressed on my heart that he wanted the church to return to its first love. And he really put that in my heart and said the church must return to its first love. Its passion, its desire for God, like it has never had, in the years gone by, where, it dwindles after a time. And you find that you've moved from that. And he said, I want the church to return to its first love. The book of Revelation talks of a church and it says, you are neither hot nor cold, and I am about to spew you out of my mouth. I wish you were either. I wish you were either. And I believe that is strongly a word for the church we live in today. A church that is, in a sense, neither hot nor cold. A church that is satisfied with middle ground Christianity. A church that is satisfied to know God on a Sunday and forget him on a Monday. A church that is satisfied to give the bare minimum and say, God, be satisfied with what I'm giving. Because, you know what? At least I come on a Sunday to church. At least I'm there. A church that has lost the value of the Word of God. Where we find that the priorities of life are so, pressing on us. That even the time to read the Word of God is, seriously, can't that be put at another date? Right? And we find that is the church we're living in. I'm not talking of our church, I'm talking of the church in general across the world we're living in today. It's a church that has lost its fervor for God. And I feel strongly that God was saying, unless the church returns to the fervor for God, nothing will happen. Unless the passion is reignited in our lives, we will not see the things that God is going to do in our generation. We will miss opportunities that God has for us. Unless the fire is rekindled inside of us. And I was just reading on the revival in South America. And he talked of a particular church where a pastor would get up and labor to ignite the fire in his church. And he'd say in his church, service would start and people would start to trickle in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes late. Right? It was a lethargic attitude to church. People didn't see the value. It was, I got to tick the book, or God might get angry with me. Right? Or God might just decide to take his blessings, so to keep the blessing, I'll be there. And he said that was the nature and the attitude of the church. And he said when worship started, everyone was quiet, the worship leader was singing. Right? And there was no fire. There was people were there, but there was a lack of fire in the church. And he said he was crying out to God. And God started to speak to him. And God said, I want you to personally start to spend time in my presence. Because the church I will fix. You spend time in my presence. And he said he started to get up in the morning and he'd start to find that his prayer time and his waiting in the presence of God would go into the afternoon. And he was just in the presence of God. And he said when that started to happen, God started to do something in him. That the fire started to spread. And then God told him, start now to get the people to come into my presence. And as the people came into the presence of God, he said that there was such a change in the church that people's eyes started to open to the power of God. That people would come early to get into church to be there for the worship. That when worship took place, there was such a presence of God that people couldn't stand in the service. They'd collapse in the presence of God. That worship would just break out across the place. Friends, do you want that to happen in our church? Do you want to see the power of God start to work? Do you want to see a holy excitement of the things of God? And we say that this man, he said, thereafter, when he started to preach, there were signs and wonders that started to happen. This church, which would do programs that show movies, that do events, that try to get a handful of people, suddenly was bursting at the seams. Today, he says, 23 years later, the fire has still not burned. The fire of that church is still raging. That church today is 25,000 strong and growing. Why? Because they seek the purposes and they started to seek the presence. For Abraham, he sought the presence of God. It wasn't, we don't find one place where he looked to try and gain the blessings. In fact, when his nephew Lot and he were parting ways, Lot chose the fertile, good ground and gave Abraham what seemed like the barren ground. But we see that Abraham saw God, not the barrenness. And therefore, where Lot went to the fertile ground and ended up with everything that he had destroyed, Abraham went to the barren ground and everything flourished there. Why? God's presence above his purpose. Friends, can I just inspire you this morning? Seek the presence of God. Don't settle for anything less. There is more for your life, but the more is found in the presence of God. You can work hard, and God desires hard work. God created man to work. Work was not a result of the fall. Sometimes people say, oh, God cursed the earth. Why did Adam and Eve mess up? See how hard we have to work. Work is not a result of the curse. God gave man the responsibility to work before the curse. Work is a part and parcel of what God desires of every one of us. The hardness of work may be a little different, right? But the need to work was given to all of us. And we see here that we need to seek the presence of God. There is hard work involved, but the presence of God will bring the purpose of God. Your life and mine this morning, are we seeking the presence of God? May I ask you to stand with me this morning as we prepare to go into communion. I'm going to ask the ushers to come.